Alright, in this video I'm going to go through the Chapter 8 test review and just work every problem. So if there's something you need help with after checking your answers, this is the place for you to be, and you can skip around based upon what problems you need help with. Okay, so these first problems, we're factoring the common factor out of each expression. So we're looking for the greatest common factor. So I'm looking for something I can divide all of these by. Alright, negative 20, 14, and 10 can all be divided by 2. Alright, and then they don't all have a variable in common. So 2 is the only common factor. So I'm going to divide everything by 2. And when I do that, negative 20 divided by 2 is negative 10m squared. 14 divided by 2 is 7. And negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. Okay. Again, I'm just going to double check negative 10, 7, and negative 5. The greatest common factor there is 1. That's the only number I can divide them all by, so I know that I am finished. Alright, number 2. 40, 16, and 8 can all be divided by 8. And then they all also have p's, so I'm going to take the lowest exponent, so I can divide everything by p squared. Okay, so again, everything is divided by 8p squared. Let me move this so we can see better. Okay, so everything is divided by 8p squared. Negative 40 divided by 8 is negative 5. P to the 7th divided by p squared is p to the 5th. 16 divided by 8 is 2. P to the 3rd divided by p squared is p. 8 divided by 8 is 1. And p squared divided by p squared is also 1. There's my final answer. Okay, so we're on to number 3, 81, 18, and 54. Well, they can all be divided by 9. Alright, every term has an x, so I can also divide by x. Every term also has a y, so I'm going to divide everything by 9xy. Alright, negative 81 divided by 9 is negative 9. Xy divided by xy would be 1. Those would all cancel out. 18 divided by 9 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. Y divided by y would be 1, so it would cancel. 54 divided by 9 is 6. X divided by x would be 1, so that's canceled out. Y to the 3rd divided by y is y squared. Alright, and number 4, same thing. 28, 32, and 7, they can all be divided by 4. There is a y in every term. There's not an x in every term, so I'm just going to divide by 4y. Alright. Negative 28 divided by 4 would be negative 7. My y's would cancel out, and I have x to the 3rd. 32 divided by 4 is 8. Y squared divided by y is y, and then that x stays there. Negative 28 divided by 4 is negative 7. Y to the 3rd divided by y is y squared. And there's my final answer. Okay, now we're no longer looking at just the greatest common factor. We're actually going to factor these completely. In number 5, I have 4 terms. So 4 terms is my clue that I need to factor by grouping. So split it up into 2 groups. The greatest common factor of this group is 2n squared. So when I divide here, I am left with 8n plus 1. The greatest common factor of this group is 7. And so if I divide everything by 7, I get 8n plus 1. When I factor by grouping, I want the parentheses to match, and they do. So my final answer, one set is going to be the inside, and another set is going to be the outside. Okay. Number 6 is also 4 terms, so again, that's going to be grouping. Alright, the greatest common factor of this group would be 7v squared. So when I divide, I would be left with 8v minus 5. The greatest common factor of this group is 5. So if I divide everything by 5, I am left with 8v minus 5. Alright, again, make sure your parentheses match, and they do. So my final answer is 8v minus 5 times 7v squared plus 5. Okay, in number 7, we have 3 terms. Alright, so 3 terms, and a is equal to 1 because there's no number in front of the x squared. So I'm going to go ahead and factor that using my x. I have 50 and negative 15. So I need 2 numbers that multiply to positive 50 and add up to negative 15. Alright, if they're going to multiply to a positive but add to a negative, they both have to be negative. Alright, and then what's going to go here is 10 and 5. Negative 10 times negative 5 is positive 50. Negative 10 plus negative 5 is negative 15. Which means that my factors are x minus 10 and x minus 5. Number 8, again, 3 terms, and a is 1, so I'm going to do the same thing. I need numbers that multiply to negative 8 and add up to negative 7. If they're going to multiply to a negative, then 1 has to be positive and 1 has to be negative. And we're going to go with positive 1 and negative 8. 1 times negative 8 is negative 8. 1 minus 8 is negative 7. So my factors are r plus 1 and r minus 8. Alright, when I get down here to number 9, it's still 3 terms, okay? But this time I have a is not equal to 1. It's some other number, so we're going to slide it down to the end. So now I have m squared minus 45m, and then 7 times 50 is 350. So I'm going to factor that. Alright, so I need numbers that multiply to 350 and add to negative 45. So again, multiply to a positive, add to a negative, both are going to be negative. And these numbers are going to end up being 35 and 10. Negative 35 times negative 10 is positive 350. Negative 35 plus negative 10 is negative 45. So my factors are m minus 35 and m minus 10. Okay, so we slid the 7 down here, so now the second part is to divide by that 7. Alright, 35 divided by 7 is 5, so this factor becomes m minus 5. 10 divided by 7, that is already a simplified fraction, so then bottoms up. So my 7 comes up in front of the m, and I have 7m minus 10. That would be my final answer. Number 10 is the same type of problem. So I'm going to take this 3 and I'm going to slide it down to the end. So my new trinomial is x squared minus 22x plus 72. Okay, and again we're going to factor that. So I need numbers that multiply to 72 and add up to negative 22. Alright, so again it's going to be negative negative. And what we end up with here is 4 and 18. So my factors are x minus 4 and x minus 18. And then whatever you slide, you have to also divide by that number. Okay, 4/3 is a simplified fraction, so bottoms up, 3x minus 4. Alright, 18 divided by 3 is 6. And now we're on to the back. So I have 4m squared minus 44m plus 72. This is the thing that we talked about a couple classes ago, where at the very beginning you should check for a greatest common factor. So 4, 44, and 72 are all divisible by 4. So I'm going to factor out a 4 before I do anything else. So when I do that, now I have m squared minus 11m plus 18. Alright, now this trinomial that's in parentheses is much easier for me to factor than if I had slid the 4 at the beginning. So I need numbers that multiply to positive 18 and add up to negative 11. My signs are both going to be negative, and so the numbers are 9 and 2. So now the 4 still stays outside, and my factors are m minus 9 and m minus 2. And that would be your final answer. Alright, 12 again is the same thing. 2, 14, and 36 have a common factor of 2. So if I factor out a 2 at the beginning, I get p squared plus 7p minus 18. And then this is something that I can factor. So something that multiplies to negative 18 and adds up to 7. Alright, I need a plus and a minus, and this is going to be 9 and 2. So my 2 that I originally factored out still comes down, and then I have p plus 9 and p minus 2. Alright, then we're on to number 13. So first thing you should notice is there are only 2 terms here. When there are only 2 terms and subtraction, it's a pretty good hint that it is a difference of squares. The only thing we have to check is that both are perfect squares. 9x squared is a perfect square. 4 is a perfect square as well. So I'm going to take the square root of each term. The square root of 9x squared is going to be 3x. The square root of 4 is 2. And then when I put these in parentheses, 1 is plus, 1 is minus. Okay. 14, again, 2 terms, so I'm going to double check. 25n squared, that is a perfect square. 16 is a perfect square as well. So I'm going to take the square root of each term. Let me write out my parentheses. The square root of 25n squared is 5n. The square root of 16 is 4. Make 1 plus and 1 minus. Okay, if we look at 15, it looks like a difference of squares again, except 27 and 75 are not perfect squares. So when that happens, you need to check for a common factor. 27 and 75 are both divisible by 3, so I can factor out a 3. And then I'm left with 9p squared minus 25. Now, if I look at the 2 terms in parentheses, they are perfect squares, so I can factor this further. Still have my 3. And my 2 new terms now are 3p and 5, 1 plus, 1 minus. Alright, 16 is the same idea. 2 terms, but 2 and 18 are not perfect squares. They do have a common factor, though, of 2. So if I factor out a 2, now I have n squared minus 9. And now these are perfect squares. So I'm going to take the square root of each piece. My 2 is still outside. The square root of n squared is n. The square root of 9 is 3. 1 is plus, 1 is minus. Okay, now we're going to solve equations by factoring. So we're going to do the same thing that we've been doing. We're going to factor and then one little step at the end to get a solution. K squared plus 4k minus 5. That is an a equals 1, so I'm going to go ahead and factor. Need numbers that multiply to negative 5, add up to positive 4. So I'm going to have 1 minus and 1 plus, and I need this to be 1 and 5. So my factors are k minus 1 and k plus 5. Alright, and then you're going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve both of those equations. So here I would add 1 and I get k equals 1. Here I would subtract 5 and I get k equals negative 5. Alright, in 18, before you can factor anything, it has to be equal to 0. So this minus n over here, I need to move to the other side. To move to the other side, I'm just going to do the opposite. So I'm going to add n. Okay, and then when I do that, I'm going to write this in standard form, because that is the way we're used to seeing it, and it makes it easier to factor. Alright, so this is a equals 1. There's no number in front of the n squared, so I need numbers that multiply to 42 and add up to 1, because remember there's a 1 here in front of that n that we just don't write. Alright, so 1 minus, 1 plus, and the only numbers that will work is negative 6 and positive 7. So my factors, n minus 6, n plus 7. Okay, so there's factored, and now to solve, I'm going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve the equation. So plus 6 here, n equals 6, subtract 7 there, n equals 7. Alright, here again we got a factor, but before I can do it I have to slide, because a is not equal to 1. So x squared minus 20x plus 75 equals 0. Draw my x. I need multiply to 75, add to negative 20. So I need 2 negative numbers here. And it's going to end up being 15 and 5. So my factors are x minus 15 and x minus 5. Alright, we slid, so we have to divide. Slide and divide. Alright, 15 divided by 3 is 5. 5 over 3 is a simplified fraction, so it bottoms up. Alright, and then last step. Let me see if I can move this down. There we go. Last step is to set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So if I add 5 to both sides here, I get x equals 5. I'm going to add 5 to both sides here, and I have 3x equals 5. Then I need to divide by 3. X equals 5/3. And then we have one last problem. Again, it has to be equal to 0 before we start factoring, so I need to subtract 7n from both sides. So I have 5n squared plus 33n minus 14 equals 0. A is not equal to 1, so I got to slide. So I have n squared plus 33n minus 70. Alright, so let's draw our x. Numbers that multiply to negative 70 and add up to 33. 1 plus, 1 minus, and the ones that are going to work are 35 and 2. So n plus 35 times n minus 2 equals 0. We slide, so we have to divide. 35 divided by 5 is 7. 2 over 5 is a simplified fraction, so bottoms up. Alright, and then each factor equal to 0 and solve. Five n equals 2, divide by 5, divide by 5, n equals 2/5. Alright, that's it for Chapter 8 test review. If you still have questions, send me a message on Remind or Twitter, and I'll see if I can help you out.